Police officers of Reddit. What's the creepiest disappearance case you've ever been assigned to? Not a cop, but I track missing persons accounts for a bank in coordination with the police. One day a cop called and said they wanted to track the accounts of a woman who had gone missing at the hands of a dangerous trafficker. The last transactions I could trace since she disappeared was at one of our branches. I pulled the footage and the trafficker was pulling a bunch of money from her account. I received an alert the next day from the account stating that a purchase was made. The purchase was from a hardware store. Shortly after, the next purchase was for a carpet cleaner rental. Needless to say, cops contacted us and says they suspect he killed her, but they couldn't locate a body. Irked me. Felt like I had witnessed a murder through simple financial transactions. Brandon Lawson. He ran out of gas on the highway in the middle of the night and called his brother to come help him. Shortly after, he called 911 and reported that someone had chased him into the woods and that he needed police. Eventually his brother and one police officer arrive at the scene and find his truck abandoned but no sign of Brandon. Brandon calls his brother and says he's bleeding and is 10 minutes away from his truck. That was the last anyone ever heard from him, and searches of the area turned up empty. College blotter. Upset student activated emergency pillars and talked to officer on speaker. Said she was being chased by unknown people. No one at the scene when officers responded. Not a cop, but had a pretty effed up disappearance happen about a mile away from where I live. A girl went missing. She was 12. The whole town, state police, and I believe possibly the FBI all got involved. Search parties in the woods and through the streets for about 2 or 3 days. Turns out she had gone over to these kids' house that she knew from school to have them fix her bike. Turns out the kids, brothers, one 15 and the other 17, planned on stealing it. Well, she put up a struggle and the one brother wound up strangling her in his basement. She was found a few days after she went missing. They stuffed her body in a trash can on trash night. The one where a man left his fiancée a detailed financial instruction sheet, including the cancellation code for their Netflix subscription, with the following line at the bottom: "They found the kiddie stuff again." Not a cop, but my daddy's. This isn't exactly a disappearance case, but a little. There was a little family in a neighborhood near me, and one morning, they were all found dead. Not very many suspects, and almost no evidence to find the guy, except for a bloody $20 bill that was found in a local pawn shop, along with a few things in the pawn shop that had been owned by the family. They ended up tracking down the fingerprints to a man. We'll call him Randy. Well, Randy was nowhere to be found in his house. The police asked all his close friends and family members, and eventually got the answer that he had gone on an Alaskan cruise that had been planned for months. Now, the police didn't know if he had purposely decided to murder and then leave, or if he had pre-planned the trip and then decided the murder. But at the moment, he was in Alaska, and the police couldn't actually arrest him there, because it was a different state and they were Maryland State Police, and so they had to contact Alaska State Troopers and alert them that Randy would be in the area. The Alaska State Troopers had to have the Maryland Police there to arrest him too. So my dad had to fly all the way up to Alaska and wait for Randy's ship to dock. And when it did, they actually found more blood-stained money on him, along with multiple Rolex watches that he had either stolen from the family or from another house. Once they arrested him, they had to chain him up and fly him back. And the pilot almost refused Randy flying on his plane. But they did eventually get home. I'm not a cop, but in my hometown near Savannah, just a month or two ago, a 14-year-old girl was missing for 2 weeks before it was reported. One of the neighbors was concerned that she hadn't seen the girl in so long, and after a while the police figured it was the father and stepmother. They brought out the dogs and found a grave just off the property where the girl had been buried, and they ended up finding her brother too, who had also been murdered by their father 2 years prior at the age of 14, who he said had moved out of state to live with their mother. Nobody ever questioned his disappearance, but the father and stepmother had apparently been abusive their whole lives and pretty much kept them locked up. I'm not a cop, but when I was in high school, a kid in my class went out fishing with his dad one weekend in the bay. They never came back. Searches went on but nothing. Never found any bodies. They found the boat a few weeks later, empty of course. It's been 8 years and nothing has ever been found. It's assumed they fell overboard, maybe in some rough weather, and drowned. They were both avid fishers and could swim. Weird that no bodies were ever found or washed up. Not a police officer, but in my state 2 school kids went missing. Later they were found, minus the kidneys. Organ traffickers from Bangladesh. The internet of whole state was blocked for 3 days to stop the mass panic. Not a police officer, but this story made me realize I don't think I could handle the stress of being one. Madison Scott disappeared from Hogsback Lake outside of Vanderhoof, British Columbia. The 28th of May, 2011. There was a birthday party being held by the lake and everyone was supposed to camp out. But instead, most people left. Madison had already set up her tent and decided to stay. Her friends left around midnight. The last people left around 4 AM. And that was the last time anyone saw her. Her cell phone pinged off a tower at 8 AM the next morning and then nothing. RCMP and countless people from small towns and communities across interior BC held multiple search parties. People dragged lake bottoms. Hunters went out to check hidden hunting cabins. Pilots who owned planes did massive aerial searches. Found absolutely nothing. She just vanished into thin air. I think it will always be the creepiest one for me because it was relatively close to my hometown. I knew people who knew her. And just anytime someone disappears into thin air, I realize that life can change in an instant. 8 years later and there are still searches held for her. Not a policeman, but my granddad was. He's in his 80s now. And was in the Med Police, UK, 4 years. He's effing brilliant. So many interesting, sad, crazy stories. So in the 1970s he was given a case of a young girl, I think she was only 16 or 17, who'd gone missing and was part of the lead investigatory team in it. They interviewed thousands of people in the local area, a small town in Essex, UK. Turns out the girl had been basically beaten to death in an alleyway just outside her house. The killer had pushed her body through a hole in one of the fences that lined the alleyway into a garden of one of the houses. So they'd searched for her for a really long time to find out, all the while her body was lying in a rosebush in one of the neighbor's gardens. Super creepy if you ask me. Also turned out that when they caught the guy, he was responsible for another killing of a young girl. Also in Essex. I wish I knew more, but there's really little information about. I do know the girl's name was Coral Vidler. Not a cop, but I did my undergrad at a college in Vermont. In the winter we would quite literally be snowed under. Over Christmas break, a sophomore went missing. He wasn't a close friend, but we had couple of classes together. It was a small liberal arts college in a small town. So everyone in the community was pretty freaked out. His phone and wallet were left in his room. So the theory was that he's been abducted. And maybe even killed. Campus got real scary for a few months. There was police everywhere. Helicopters overhead. Students marching through the snow in lines looking for a body. Finally, when the snow and ice thawed, they found his body in the creek. Police surmise he entered the water from the bridge in town. But no one knows if he jumped or was pushed. This one still haunts me. Not a cop, but the disappearance of Sherry Mann has never been solved. She disappeared in 1984 not far from where I grew up. Police saw a van with a painting of a skier on the side. Pretty unique, so no problem. Right? Nope. No one has ever reported seeing that van again either. Dealt several times with a young mother who would always go missing for a few days and leave her child with relatives. Several missing persons reports over time. Turns out she was shacking up with her PCP dealing boyfriend in a nearby city. One day the lady walks in and says her daughter was kidnapped. I do some work and find the aunt took the child because mom is just a terrible person. State did not want to get involved, so we have to give the kid back. I turn to my partner and tell him mom will definitely be dead within a few months. Probably turn up in a ditch or dumped in the river where she goes to visit her dealer boyfriend. Fast forward 3 months and I turn on the news to see a story of a woman found dumped in the river. It was mom. She was stabbed to death by her boyfriend and dumped in the river. That one creeped me out a bit. Not me personally, but other officers on my department. 70-year-old female with dementia would often leave her home and go for walks around her property. One day, she never came home, and it should be noted that we live on an island 30 miles out from the rest of the United States. State Police, K9s, our entire department, news helicopters, Coast Guard helicopters and boats, Marine Division, all searched land and ocean for this woman. We reviewed security footage at the airport and steamship ferry to see if she boarded either to leave island. But she didn't. She was never found, and to this day, we don't know what happened. Two theories have arrived though. She walked right into the ocean and somehow her body disappeared, a new washed up, or two, she walked into the construction site of a sewer plant and fell into a tank full of waste just before the tank was permanently covered. Not a cop. But back in my home state there was a little girl that went missing on her way to school. It was huge news because the family was cleared pretty quickly. Like a week or so later they find part of her body in a field. Then this 19-year-old guy's mother notices a smell in his room, finds the rest of the little girl, and calls and has him turn himself in. This case always stuck with me. My partner and I were called to the apartment of a man whose girlfriend disappeared. Weirdly, he claimed he had this coffee table that made things disappear if they were left on it overnight. He theorized that his girlfriend must have fallen against it during the night and been disappeared by the table. Of course, I thought it was pure bull. But my partner says he has the same table and thinks it may be true. We never did find out what happened to her.